This channel is part of the History Hit network.
Fantastic view, isn't it? This is the Costa Blanca in Spain, holiday destination for hundreds of thousands of Brits every year. But it once looked very different. 900 years ago, this whole country was an Islamic state, and the towns down there would have looked like Cairo or Baghdad, a bit of North Africa in Europe. This is the town of Denia, just along the coast from Benidorm. Over the next 3 days, Time Team have been given the opportunity to dig up more of Denia's rich past, to find out just how exotic life really was here, compared with the cold and mud of medieval Britain. Mick? What are you doing here? Why aren't you digging?
I came down here to look at this great rock with a castle on the top, which is all that's left of this Islamic town that was down here.
This is what, Arabs and other people from North Africa?
Yeah, they're coming in about 711. There's a great Arab invasion that takes over the area, and then they're here till 1242 when the Christians kick them out.
500 years?
Yeah, so there's a lot of archaeology here, but it's all under this town. It's a bit like the sort of problem we have in England where, you know, you only see it when you redevelop bits of the town. You take a building down, you dig it before a new building goes up, and you have to put various plots together to make like a jigsaw out of it.
So we're actually going to be digging an Islamic town?
Yeah, but it's actually very relevant to us up in Britain, because in the 12th century in particular, the Arab world is much more advanced than we are, and the ideas are actually coming through ports like this, and they're flowing northwards, you know, to up our sort of area.
What do you mean the ideas are flowing
Well,
in?
things like mathematics, science, medicine, all that sort of stuff is much more advanced, and those ideas are filtering through to us.
So where are we going to dig?
Oh, well, I'll have to take you to it. Come over this way.
During the Islamic occupation of Denia, the castle would have been known as the Al-Kathaba, and Spain itself was called Al-Andalus. Other Arabic words, of course, are more familiar to us. So Benidorm's, what, 30 miles up the road?
Yeah, and that's another Arab settlement. The name actually comes from Beni Dahim.
What's that mean?
The son of Dahim. It's, you know, it's an Arab place name. Whereas Denia is actually derived from a Roman place name. There was a big Roman settlement here, and there was a temple to Diana, and the Roman name was Dianium.
Denia may never become as built up as Benidorm, but currently there are lots of new building projects in development, and consequently a lot of rescue archaeology in progress. At this site, for instance, where we've been invited to help, Pepe Gisbert and his team of diggers have discovered substantial remains belonging to part of the walled Islamic town. Cool!
That's good, isn't it?
There's a lot of walls.
There is.
Is this all Islamic stuff?
Well, a lot of it is, yeah. What we've done is asked Pepe to advise Victor on a reconstruction. So Victor's drawn the wall. This is the big one right across the middle of the site there, you can see, coming up to a doorway, which is where the girls are digging, just down there, look. And then that's coming across to a big tower base, which is just down here. And this is a suburb, isn't it, Pepe?
Yes. It's an important suburb. Really, the quarter of the population of Denia lives in this suburb.
Yeah.
All the craftsmen and tradesmen lives here.
And how does this here fit into this drawing here?
Oh, it's just here. This is the castle, the old Al-Kasaba. This is the Medina, the city center of the Islamic town, and this is the suburb that has a contact with the Medina by a bridge, because this is a natural channel of water. The suburb is just in front of the Islamic harbor.
And what are these little things here?
Well, this is the burial area here that they've been digging
Yes.
up, but we've brought Jackie McKinley with us to do some work on the bones there, because it should help you if we do some osteoarchaeology or some paleopathology, shouldn't it?
Yes, I think it's very interesting because with this we can see the age, the sex, and the diet of these Muslim people that lives in the suburb of Tania.
This is Pepe's best interpretation of the site so far, but details may change as the dig goes on. Essentially, this is the area where we're going to be working, with the main focus of our expertise being targeted at the cemetery inside the walls of the suburb.
History Hit is like Netflix, just for history fans, with exclusive history documentaries covering some of the most famous people and events in history just for you. With familiar faces such as Dan Jones and Dr. Eleanor Yanega, we've got hundreds of documentaries covering the greatest figures and events of medieval history. We're committed to bringing history fans award-winning documentaries and podcasts that you cannot find anywhere else. Sign up now for a free trial, and Chronicle fans get 50% off their first 3 months. Just be sure to use the code Chronicle at checkout.
Certainly an awful lot of them.
Yeah,
absolutely. An awful lot of work to do here.
And they're all arranged really neatly, all facing in the same direction, most of them on their sides. But this one here has got really curiously flexed legs.
Yeah.
Tight in. Why would that be?
Well, I think it's probably still being shrouded because the upper part of the body is quite tight, although it's slumped over. But what that does indicate is that it's gone in before rigor mortis has set in.
OK, so we're dealing Islamic burial practice then, aren't we?
Islamic burial practice to bury a body within 24 hours.
Until now, no osteoarchaeological work on the burials has been done, so even basic information about the age and gender of the people buried here will be new information for Pepe. At the moment, all we know is that they're all Muslims buried facing Mecca. Time to find out more about them.
Well, is that finished?
Yeah, it is.
This is Denyer, of course. And this is the Greenwich Meridian line. So we're right directly below southern England there, aren't we?
Yeah.
When we say that the Islamic invasion came from North Africa, whereabouts?
I think you're right in saying Muslim invasion, because it was forces composed not only of Arabs, but also Berbers and black Africans. And they swept round here, up through Gibraltar in 711.
They actually crossed to Gibraltar?
Yes, they did. They crossed over to what they call Jebel Tariq, meaning the mountain of Tariq, and then rapidly progressed, reaching Toledo in the same year, 711. And then across this whole zone that you can see here soon became Muslim Spain.
And what's this here, the frontier zone?
Well, this is a sort of indeterminate buffer zone that would have had mixed communities. And then up here you have a much more defined Christian area. But it would have changed over the centuries, that's an important point.
So what happens to all the Christians and Jews who were in occupied Andalus?
That's a good question, but they're actually protected under Islam as people of the book, people of the Bible and people of the Torah. So they paid a slightly higher poll tax, but they're allowed religious freedom to a certain extent.
For us, this dig is a rare opportunity to find out about this extraordinary period of Islamic settlement in Europe. And in this area, where the burials extend outside the main site, Phil can't wait to start work.
Phil.
Hello, Jenny. We've got a fascinating little site here. I mean, it's quite complicated, but I think with one or two quite strategically placed trenches, we can actually do a lot of good. What we've actually got here, you see where all these sticks are?
Yeah.
Those are actually the positions of graves. Our main cemetery is literally just the other side of that wall.
Yeah.
So really what we've got is a cemetery extending through that wall in quite nice lines straight across here. But what we've also got here is this cobbled, metalled surface, which is a road.
Right.
And that's coming along here. And associated with that, fronting onto it, we've got these buildings. You see quite small buildings, one there and another one there. And they run along here. You see there's actually a burial actually inside one of the buildings. And what we don't know is whether people were actually living here with burials under the floor or whether the buildings were knocked down and the burials were put in subsequently. Now I think one way we may be able to resolve that, look at that, I was looking around here earlier on. Look.
What is that?
Well, it's a skull.
Oh, right.
And it's not got a stick with it. So, I don't know, maybe they just didn't see it. But it's in a crucial position, an absolutely crucial position, because it's within the road. Now, if we can actually resolve the relationship of this skeleton to the road, in other words, whether we can see whether the road's been dug away and the body put in, or whether in fact the metalling of the road surface goes on over it, then that would give us a relationship between these two things and, by inference, the relationship with the buildings.
So Phil and Jenny have an important trench to dig, but they're going to need help to do it. Time to recruit some more diggers.
I found, do you find?
Excellent.
This is Patricia, Dominique.
And I'll bet you speak very, very good English, don't you?
Better than our Spanish, anyway.
Well, I'm sure it is.
Pepe is also keen to target our resources at another rescue site here, in what was the industrial part of the Islamic town. It's not the most glamorous of locations, but this scrap of land is in an area where Islamic pottery kilns have been discovered. We've agreed to do a geophys survey to detect any archaeology here which will otherwise be lost when building work goes ahead.
Aha, that looks like we have got the geophysics results.
Well, we have. We're still trying to make sense of it.
Oh dear.
I mean, we've surveyed from the edge of the building behind you.
Right.
Right up to the breaking slope there, but there's so much modern material.
It looks a nightmare for you here.
It is, and I mean, there's 3 areas we could go at.
Right.
Geophys have detected strong signals which could just be caused by modern debris. On the other hand, they could be kilns.
Well, it's worth having a look.
Okay, are you happy to go with that, Mick?
Yes, but my problem is I haven't actually got a JCB on this
Are
site.
you joking?
No, it's really hard here. There's lots of rubble here, but I haven't got a JCB.
It's not a site we can dig by hand,
No.
so we'll have to get a JCB. Well, we can't do anything now, so if you two go and get a drink, Nick, you speak Spanish.
Yeah,
can you help me get hold of a JCB?
I think we can get hold of a JCB without too much.
I can cope with a drink as well.
Drink, absolutely.
What's the Spanish for yellow page?
At the cemetery site, our strategy for digging the burials has been decided. In addition to recording and lifting some of the skeletons already excavated, Jackie has asked for 3 more graves to be dug at either end of the site to establish if there are any differences across the cemetery. Joining us in Spain is Mustafa Said, a Muslim born in Morocco. He's intrigued to see the burial ground of fellow North Africans who lived and died here in Denia at least 800 years ago. Apart from gender and age, I asked Jackie McKinley what else we might learn about them.
Well, mostly what you're going to see is what we call chronic diseases, long-term diseases, the same kind of things that people suffer from now, you know, the things that give you backache and make your legs hurt and perhaps give you toothache, that kind of thing. The chances of seeing what people die of, which is the classic thing that people want to know, is probably quite minimal because most people in the past would have died of infectious diseases which are very fast-acting and a lot of the time don't have time to affect the bone. Yeah.
Do you think these people would be of particularly high status?
I think it's difficult to say because one of the defining criteria of the Muslim burial, which these very much are, you can tell from the orientation, the face directed towards Mecca, lying on the right-hand side, is the absence of grave goods, which archaeologists use to define status. So it is very difficult to say. But being a port community, I would think it was quite mixed here, from sailors to rich merchants, even if they died quickly.
There aren't any headstones or anything?
No, well, that's another of the criteria of a Muslim burial. Usually there aren't headstones, though there could be a small marker stone at the head in some instances and a little stone at the foot, but here we don't have them.
Why are they all on their sides, Mustafa?
Well, that's the normal practice, is standard Islamic burial. That's because of the size of the grave. It should not be wider than 1 span and 4 fingers. Therefore, you have to put the people on sideways in the grave, usually on the right-hand side, with the right hand under the head.
1 span and 4 fingers?
Yes, and there is a saying in Islam, they say that that's the only thing you take with you when you go is 1 span and 4 fingers.
No, you can't, it's too hot.
At the kiln site, the shocking news for Mick the Dig is that although Carenza has managed to get hold of a JCB, it won't arrive until 5 p.m. Until then, this site, which is rock hard, will have to be dug by hand.
Carenza!
Have you found something?
Yes!
Brilliant.
I'm finding lots of metal.
Oh.
Basically, the magnetometer has pulled up metal. So the spike on the drawing is this. It's not archaeology, it's rubbish.
Still, it means Mick can now help Carenza with her trench. The prospect of finding an Islamic kiln in Denia has enormous interest to all our archaeologists because the pottery made here was very advanced and clearly influenced by contact with many different parts of the world.
It's an splendid dish that represents a Mediterranean ship of the end of the 10th century with 3 masts, 3 Latin sails, and in this case, a scroll with an inscription in Arabic. It shows the trade with the north of Africa in this period. It's really
This bowl was imported from Tunisia, but all these other pots were made in Denia.
In this case, you have a bowl with a section typical of pottery of the Tang dynasty in China.
Oh, what sort of date is all of this then?
The date is about the first years of the 11th century.
Because in Britain, you see, we don't get pottery of this quality with this sort of decoration for another 200 years, in fact. You know, it's very much later.
Yeah, well, this is an example of technology travelling from east to west.
And then travelling from south to north to get to us.
Yes, really.
At last, the JCBs arrived, and the hard top layer is off. Time to find out what geofizz we're detecting underneath.
I think it's a service, yes, a drain or something, I think.
That's what the geophysics is picking up.
2 geofizz targets down, 1 to go.
Arriba hasta el final, arriba hasta el final.
Have you sorted the street plan out yet?
No, not yet. I'm still at the information gathering stage.
Right.
Just trying to get some idea of how the Islamic town worked.
Yeah.
Stuart will be looking at how the suburb and industrial district fit into the wider picture of Islamic Denia.
Right. I mean, are the early maps any good? Because that's an obvious source.
Well, they're variable. They seem quite good round about the coast area. With it being a port, it's been fairly well mapped.
Yeah.
But in the town area, they can be a bit dodgy. I mean, that's part of what I'm trying to do at the moment, see if I can relate all the information.
Stop!
Back at the kiln site, the signs are looking more promising.
So you reckon all of this is probably Islamic?
Yeah, I think that is the tiles. Yeah, that's for the roof of the houses.
Right,
and
roof
also
tile.
this is.
That's the handle, obviously.
Yeah.
No actual structure here, but Giuseppe has been checking a new area on the edge of the geofizz survey and has found more pottery and indications that we could even have found a kiln.
Giuseppe, what are these?
This is a kiln furniture.
From a kiln?
Yes.
Brilliant.
Large bars.
To keep the vessels apart when they're being fired,
yes,
so they don't stick together.
The kiln furniture was found here in this patch of reddish soil, which could be evidence of the structure of the kiln itself.
This is different to what we've been digging up elsewhere.
Completely.
But I think we need to see a lot more of this. Tomorrow, I think we'd get the machine in here, clear a good-sized space around here, have a look at this.
But that's about it for day one. There's just enough time left now to check on Phil's progress.
I can't believe it. We've been working hard all day and you're just drinking booze.
What do you mean working hard? I tell you what, we've shifted some muck today, Tony.
What do you got?
Well, we set out today, this morning, to actually establish whether the graves in the cemetery that go through there cut through the road, that cobbled area associated with these buildings. And we can now tell you quite clearly that the graves cut through the road. They are definitely later.
And what's that you got in your hand?
Well, this is our star find. This is the one we're really, really chuffed about. This is a piece of pottery which dates to the 1,000-year millennium, about 1000 AD. Isn't that right, Pappy?
Yes, sure. I think it's from a kiln of Denia, and it's a Palatine pottery used in the table of the kings of Denia in the beginning of the 11th century. It's a very, very nice find.
So what do we reckon these foundations are here?
Yes, I think it's a row of shops. In the end, we have found in this maritime suburb that just what we need, a row of shops for the craftsmen sell its products.
So it looks as though we've not only got a Millennium Sherd, we've also got a Millennium shopping centre. Beginning of day 2 in Spain, and I'm now standing on the Greenwich Meridian line. How do I know this is the Greenwich Meridian line? Because there's this rather attractive monument here that says on it, Meridiano de Greenwich. And I've got Bernard with me with his GPS to confirm for me that this is the Greenwich Meridian line. Bernard, you're not going to tell me what I think you're going to tell me, are you?
I reckon you're about 3.5 seconds west up there, Tony. I've walked down here about 100 yards, and I reckon this is where the meridian actually is.
Thank you, Bernard. Beginning of day 2, and I'm about 100 yards away from the Greenwich Meridian line, which here, which is I suppose about 1,000 miles from Greenwich, passes through this big orange grove. And oranges, I'm reliably informed, were introduced into Spain by the Islamic settlers. Meanwhile, a short distance away at the cemetery inside the walled suburb of medieval Denia, the site is a hive of activity, with both British and Spanish members of the team enjoying the challenges of communication.
Estaban las postillas ladeadas.
Ah, pero están todos así, ¿no?
No, no, no. When they've moved, when they look like they've moved, that's happened afterwards.
Yeah,
because the
yeah,
body's
yeah.
lied on the side, and then when it decomposes, sometimes it slumps forward or it slumps back. But they were all the same way to start with, all of them.
¿Cómo?
Yeah.
At the kiln site further inland, Pepe's arrived to see the evidence unearthed yesterday.
I think you will not find yet any structure. Is a place for the extraction of the clay.
Oh,
I think it's an Islamic pit.
So it's an Islamic clay pit where they were digging the clay from
Yes.
to use in the kilns.
Denia is one of only 3 places in Europe where Islamic pottery can be found, as well as the kilns in which it was made. We found some pinched clay bars used to separate the pots during firing, but have we found a kiln?
It's clearly different to that. And we think this is part of the structure of the kiln.
Yes, it seems the shape of the kiln. But the problem is that in the workshop in Denia there are 2 types of kilns.
Right.
In one of the kilns, the bar form part of the build, of the structure of the kiln.
So those funny bar-shaped things
Yeah.
form part of the actual structure on one of the
Yes.
kilns.
And in the other case, the bar is used only for separate the different pottery inside the kiln.
As you no doubt appreciate by now, the potential for great archaeology here is tremendous. But because so much of Islamic Denia has been covered up by later development, looking for finds there can be pretty frustrating. Of course, the same isn't true under the ocean, which is why we're sending Phil down there. Good luck, buddy. To illustrate Denia's rich history as a trading port, Phil's been invited to see for himself just how much pottery from different ages can be collected from the seabed. Apparently, if we're lucky, we should be able to collect a variety of finds ranging from Roman to medieval in date. While Phil's busy here, I've promised to go and check on how things are going at his trench, where we're excavating down below one of the walls of the Millennium Shops.
Hello.
Are you in charge while Phil's away then?
I am trying to keep things moving along.
What have we got?
We're trying to understand the front wall of our shops, basically, and find out how far down it goes and what's going on the outside in the street compared to the inside. So I think we need a bit longer before we're sure what's going on, but we're getting there.
The latest news from the main site next door is that Geophys have completed a survey in the area of the river channel outside the walled suburb.
The old maps show a natural river channel, and then in the 18th century there was a canal put through as well, so there should be a lot of disturbance associated with that.
And there's some evidence for a bridge here?
Well, the only evidence that Pepe has actually shown is he interprets 2 walls coming off that 1811 map.
That would help us a lot then with interpreting what's going on in this part of the town.
Yeah, this would be a bridge between this walled suburb and the main town over there.
So we've done the geophysics.
Oh, look at that. Wonderful.
It's just possible these relate to the later buildings, the walls, but what's particular interest is whether that could be a pier base supporting a bridge.
If we dig a hole, we should find that out, shan't we? Can you fix that for us so we can get on with it then?
I think we can find it.
Carenza, meanwhile, has taken a break from working at the kiln site to get involved in what should be one of the most enjoyable challenges of the day, to try and recreate some of the food that would have been eaten here in Denia 900 years ago.
I know, sorry I'm a bit late.
It's okay, don't worry.
So, is this what you're going to cook from?
Yes, this is the book we are going to cook from. It's an interesting book, actually. It dates to the 13th century, but actually...
13th century?
Yes.
And they had a cookery book in the 13th century?
It is what has amazed me as well.
You can be more precise in the date. 1012 is when it was originally compiled.
1012?
1012.
Where does it come from? I mean, who wrote it? This is the Mrs. Beeton of the 10th century, is it?
The anonymous medieval cookbook was published in 1966 in Arabic, Spanish and French. We've managed to get hold of the Spanish translation.
Have we chosen some recipes to cook?
Yes, the recipe we're going to reproduce is a plato de ciruelas. That is a lamb dish with prunes.
Lamb with prunes. That
Yes.
sounds lovely.
Yes.
Many of the recipes in our Islamic cookery book use ingredients that were actually brought to Spain from North Africa. The local market's full of them. All the citrus fruits, mangoes, apricots, olives, artichokes, spinach, and many of the spices like saffron, cinnamon, coriander, all introduced into Spain by the Muslim settlers.
This is something we take for granted, the carrot, but this actually came from Afghanistan.
Yes.
Joking, really?
No.
Indeed.
And down there, of course, we've got the aubergine or
And here
eggplant.
we've got the figs as well. Which,
That was brought in as well?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Something, again, that we take for granted now in the UK or here in Spain. And were introduced by the Muslims, and they would have grown in the conditions around here, especially suited to salty water, for example.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Because it had the only natural harbour for miles around, Denia was always a busy and important port. And now hopefully Phil's got the evidence to prove it. Phil, I'm so jealous. What a lot of stuff you got.
I don't reckon that's bad for half an hour's work, is it, really?
Did he do well, Pepe?
Yes, I think it has been a good catch.
What has he got?
Well, we have all these pieces of the Roman period. You have a rim of Antipolitanian amphora for oil.
An amphora, yeah?
Yes.
The rim of a Roman amphora from the 3rd century. But what about the Islamic period?
You have this beautiful neck of 2 bottles from the kilns of Denia, pottery workshops of Denia of 10th century and 12th century.
We've got pots from Italy in the 17th century.
That's the marbled ware.
Yes, yes,
I love that stuff, I
marble.
really do.
English ginger beer bottles from the 19th century. All evidence of Denia's rich history as a trading port. But it's the Islamic pottery that we're most interested in. This 12th century tin-glazed bottle, for instance, the product of technology that only reached Britain 500 years later. And who's to say that one of these Islamic pots wasn't made in the pottery kiln that we're currently digging up?
Yeah. The boys are keen to get me chained to the cooker, but I managed to sneak off to come and see how you were getting on. How's it going?
Oh, having a great time here. What I've got is, I've got a large hole here.
It's a lot bigger than it was when I saw it this morning, yes.
Yeah, so I've got natural clay here,
Right.
a large hole cut into it, which is full of stone and clay, and loads of pottery. This is just a few from cleaning
come in?
here. Yeah, this is just
Crumbs.
this is a few bits that I've actually just cleaned off the top.
Wow,
Some bits are marked out ready to be painted, but clearly unfinished. Sure evidence of pottery production. Best of all, the shape of the kiln is beginning to show up really well.
Oh, that is fantastic. Good grief, look at that. It
great,
couldn't be better, could it?
This red here is where, when this was hot, it's
That's
actually
the burned earth,
burnt
isn't it?
the earth there.
At the local catering school, our Moroccan cook Mustafa has enlisted the help of Jose, a Spanish cookery student, who's intrigued to learn about food as it was cooked in Spain over 700 years ago.
If you chop the garlic, I'll chop the onion.
It seems fairly straightforward. Lamb flavoured with onions, salt and garlic. And then the spices. Coriander seeds, black pepper, cumin, cinnamon, and also saffron. Saffron, of course, is a vital ingredient in the famous Spanish dish paella.
Paella is an Arabic word for leftovers. And in the good households, the servants used to be left with all the leftovers, and they used to assemble them and they make a dish for themselves after their masters eat. And hence the word baqiyya, which is the original Arabic word being mispronounced in Spanish to paella.
One word. One word.
As GeoFizz have finished all their survey work, they've been persuaded somehow to investigate their own results and are looking for evidence of a bridge pier.
But you're not digging.
No, we're playing on the beach.
Mick at the moment's checking on our progress with the burials inside the suburb. And in this grave, it appears we have two burials, where the skull and arm of one skeleton seem to be under the legs of another.
Looking at that, certainly that one looks to be overlaying that one, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it's directly on the
crushed
top.
it slightly.
Yeah.
But the fact that it would appear that the bone underneath is still probably more or less in position suggests they've reused the same grave for a second burial.
Right, rather than put them in at the same time.
Yeah, I know that Mustafa was saying that isn't common practice now. That wouldn't be allowed unless there were exceptional circumstances.
But this is a long time ago. I mean, this is 900 years ago.
Yeah, I think things may well have been perhaps not quite as rigid, or there may have been slight regional variations or something in the past.
This one has got a hand up under the chin, hasn't it, on this side?
That's the classic that Mustafa was talking about, having one hand up underneath the head.
The child was buried first, and then the teenager at a later date. Maybe they were related, or perhaps buried so close because of lack of space. The pottery we found in the burials examined so far suggests that all these people died during the last 100 years of Islamic occupation, before the Christians recaptured Denia in 1242. This was a time when Denia was really flourishing as a port, when it had become what is known as a taifa.
I've heard this term taifa, Alan, and I understand Denia was one, but I don't know what they are.
Well, the taifa is the name given to both the king and to the state, which turned into a kingdom. And these states and kings developed when Cordoba fell between the years 1010, 1013. And nobles from the Cordoban regime moved out to pre-existing towns and settled there and set up kingdoms there.
And so who was the first king of Denia then?
Well, the first king of Denia was a chap called Mujahid, and he was quite a character because he couldn't expand his kingdom landwards because all of these other kingdoms surrounding him. So he went on as far as Ibiza. And it was then from Ibiza in the year 1015 that he went as far as to conquer Sardinia.
Cool. And was that the end of his ambitions then?
Well, he would have liked to have gone further. In fact, there's an Italian legend which says that he sent the Pope a sack of chestnuts to show that there were lots of Muslims ready to give their lives to conquer Christendom. And the story goes that the Pope sent back a sack of millet to say that there were indeed even more Christians prepared to lose their lives defending Christendom from the Muslim.
Great, I like it.
As you can see, the colours now of the saffron and so on are getting released.
Do you think this is similar to the Islamic way of cooking in the 12th century in a terracotta vessel with the fire inside another terracotta vessel?
Yes, I think this is very, very much authentic for the period. The reason being is the terracotta distributes the heat throughout. So you get an even cooking all the way, and also the amount of fire you require with the woods you require for the fire is very small.
Have you got the cooking times in your Islamic Mrs. Beaton?
No, in my Islamic Mrs. Beaton, she lets me guess.
The prunes will be added once the lamb's cooked. But now, using another recipe in our ancient Islamic cookbook, it's time to prepare a pudding. We're making a date pie, a dish that everyone would have been able to afford in medieval Denia.
Are you getting the knack of the dates now, Jose?
I'm getting what?
Sorry. Are you getting used to doing the dates? The knack, it means a way of doing it.
Si. Then more you do, then easy is...
That's the knack, yes.
Once the main dish with meatballs is cooked, the date pie is baked under an earthenware lid, which goes on top of our improvised hearth. Meanwhile, at the kiln site, the rescue dig is proving hard work under the hot afternoon sun, but it's not without its rewards.
It's a glazeware.
Glazedware, that's beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah, of course.
How old is that?
I don't know exactly, but I suppose that is not very old. It's maybe 12th century.
That's pretty old.
Yeah.
That is pretty old.
Yeah.
Well, in fact, according to Pepe, this is an 11th century tin glazed jug, and typical of the fine pottery being made in Denia at the time. But now we've reached the end of day 2, and it's time to taste some exotic Islamic food. Not only our 13th century recipes, but also several other North African dishes prepared by Benito, a local restaurateur. A splendid pumpkin pudding, artichoke stuffed with aubergine and lamb, and a stew made with lentils, asparagus and garlic. Benito's keen to restore North African cuisine back on the Spanish menu. What does he think to our Islamic dish?
That's quite good.
Oh, quite good.
Maybe he doesn't like prunes. Here comes the date pie.
That smells delicious, that does.
It certainly seems to be a hit with Jose. But is Mustafa happy with his 13th century style dish of lamb with prunes?
The flavors, the saffron, the combination of the spices is stunning. I just wished I lived in this country. I mean, the food is, wow, it's excellent.
It's the end of day 2. Tomorrow we're going to try and pull together all the different bits of the jigsaw, the road, the bridge, the buildings, the pottery, the skeletons, to see if we can create a picture for Pepe of what life was like in Denia in the 11th century. Day 3 and the start of our final day here in Denia, our last chance to make a big contribution to sorting out the archaeology of the Islamic town that stood here 900 years ago. Jenny, how are we getting along with our Millennium Shopping Centre?
Not bad. I'm sort of standing in the start of it, really.
Yeah.
I've got the layer of sand that was the beach that was here before the shopping centre was built.
So that's right down the bottom of the trench?
Yeah, right down here. And we've got lots of pottery out of it, some Roman, some Islamic. That's just sort of rolling around on the beach before there's anything here.
Oh, yeah, this looks really like the kind of stuff that we were getting out of the sea yesterday, doesn't it?
Yeah, big Roman amphora. And then basically, around the start of the 11th century, at the millennium, dated by the pottery we found on the first day, this sand dries out enough for people to start building here. And we've had this fantastic find. It's a little coin with Arabic on it. So it's some Islamic money.
Can we date it, do you know?
No, it's not quite well preserved enough to actually know what date it is, but it's got Arabic script on it.
Phil, how long were these shops in existence for?
Probably not much more than about 100, maybe 200 years at the most, Tony. It's certainly by the end of the 12th century, the buildings must have fallen down, the road must have gone out of use sufficiently that we've actually got the cemetery extending along over this, over our shopping centre. You see here, these cobbles are the road. And here's the edge of the grave coming along here with these stones going round there and back there. And there is the skull that we saw on the first day.
Yeah, and we can see that this skull actually is facing east again by the bones on the side, the cheekbones and so on. And then the burial's back down here because here's the ribs, look.
So you've got this peninsula of stones that's been left by another grave cut, and there's a whole row of them. Now, these graves actually are planted right on top of the road. They're not just butting up to the edge of it, they're right in the middle of the road. And you wouldn't actually put graves in the middle of a road unless the road had gone out of use.
And do we know what period these graves are?
Well, they must be exactly the same as the main cemetery. So they must be certainly into the 1200s, maybe, yes, up to the middle of the
1242, the whole thing's gone out of use when the Christians take over.
So is that the end of the story of this site?
Almost. I mean, as soon as the cemetery goes out of use, we've got agriculture. We've got a big plough soil, and that takes us right up to the modern day and modern Dernier.
Mick, what's been going on here? I thought we were going to crack on and get a big section through there and get all pottery out and get into the kiln. You don't seem to have done very much at all since
We've done a vast amount here. We're actually trying to excavate this small kiln here. It is really difficult to dig this. The soil here is really baked hard. Yesterday, the sun was so bright you physically can't see the colours very well. So as you're digging, you're constantly having to check what you're pulling out.
It's a hard life as a digger, but Mick's right. We're going to need extra people here today if we're going to fully understand this pottery kiln and the area around it. We haven't worked out yet what part of the kiln we're digging, but this is Victor's sketch of one type of Islamic kiln.
But we found a lot of those bars. I don't think I'd really got clear how they were being used.
There's nice things that's sitting there.
And it's nice to have the figures there. I mean, that gives a real helpful feel of scale.
Scale of it, yes.
Though that said, I mean, the feature we're in at the moment is only about that big. So...
That's right, I mean...
Mick reckons it's the firebox, but even so, I would have said it was probably a bit smaller.
At the main site, Phil's now working on what Pepe thinks is a gateway into the walled suburb. The bones from the burials are being washed ready for examination back at the incident room, while Mustafa is baking bread North African style. This is by way of a demonstration, as several Islamic bread ovens have been unearthed on this site.
Ah! Bit hot there. I love it. I like the women.
Yes, please do.
Phil, you're watching how a trench really should be dug, are you?
Well, I mean, I'm trying to learn a thing or two off these two, but I ain't learning much at the minute.
This is look at this.
What have you got for us?
Well, this is our anomaly. Really compact stone, possibly in a circle. We've just got one quadrant of it here. But 11th century pot coming out. Look at this.
That's good stuff, isn't it, eh? And that is right off the top, too.
Yeah,
You're not actually into it, that's just lying around on the top.
Yeah. Get digging. Have a bit of Mustafa's.
Oh,
it's all right.
Keep us going. Get water as well.
Meanwhile, inside the walls of the suburb, we've reached the stage where we're ready to talk about our study of the burial area. Barney, for instance, who's been excavating a burial here, has found some dating evidence that's significantly earlier than anything found in other areas of the cemetery.
This little piece here,
Can I?
yeah, comes from a tiny little jar with two handles. It's 11th century, which is great because it seems to tie in with our idea that this whole area of the graveyard might be of a different and earlier phase.
Also, it appears that the graves in this part of the cemetery are on a slightly different alignment, and Mustafa has ideas about this based on his experience living in Morocco.
The likely explanation is that the two cemeteries were run by two different attendants, meaning the grave diggers, and who were measuring with slightly different equipment. So one will have this kind, because you see, if you can see the alignment, you don't have very much of difference.
It's just the fact that two different people were looking after the cemetery at different times.
At different times.
And
so
that would then allow us to have our two phases within that late Islamic period.
There are over 200 burials here, which eventually will all have to be recorded and lifted before building work goes ahead. We think that this area might have been the original cemetery before it expanded in the 12th century. Of the 80 skeletons we examined, we were able to identify 23 as being male and 28 as female. Jackie chose to study these two burials in detail. What can she tell us about them?
This one here is a Negroid skull, whereas this one here is a Caucasoid skull.
How on earth can you tell that?
If you look at the Negroid skull, this is the maxilla, this part here, the upper jaw, is far more pronounced. It protrudes far further than the Caucasoid one. That's much flatter across there. And the other difference is in the nasal aperture. If you look, this is much wider across here than this.
So I mean, this is interesting in that we've clearly got probably European and African elements in the population here.
Well, European type, because some of the North African peoples would have Caucasian type skulls. Right. It depends what part of Africa you're dealing with, but it does clearly show that people were coming in from different areas and settling here. And there was no differentiation in where they were. They weren't put in one particular bit of the cemetery or anything. It was your beliefs that put you there. Nothing else. That was all that mattered.
And are these the two skeletons that go with these two skulls?
Yeah, not all of them. Just the bits we managed to wash so far.
And can we learn anything about those?
Jackie has estimated the height of the two individuals by making a calculation based on measuring the humerus bone on each skeleton.
The Caucasoid is about 5'5", whereas the Negroid skeleton is about 5'6½".
Oh right, so just a little bit taller.
They're just a little bit taller than each other.
And is there anything about how robust these individuals were?
Well, yeah, that's where the real difference lies. If you look at these are the two bones that I took the measurements on.
Crikey, that's much thicker and heavier, isn't it, than this one?
Yeah.
Is that because he was built like that, or is it because he's done a lot more work?
Probably part of each, I think.
And with a bit of help from Victor, we can start to imagine what our two Muslim residents of medieval Denia might have looked like. But now, time to find out what we've discovered about the process of making pottery in Islamic Denia.
What have you got?
Well, we've finally got our kiln ready for you to see, really. Mick's just about getting to the bottom of it there. I don't know if you can see right in the bottom there, it's sort of grey and ashy right at the base. It would have been, when it was in use, it would have been about that deep. You can see how wide it was. Then it would have had a domed clay roof on it. In fact, most of the domed clay roof is sitting just behind you there. What's really exciting about it, though, and is almost unique, is the fact that the main kiln is 11th century, but after it went out of use in the 12th century, it was these little holes were dug in it as it was starting to fill up, and they're for preparing the oxides for glazing.
Oh, wow.
And that hasn't been found before in Spain, we don't think, so that's a really unique find.
We've actually found quite a lot of the wall of the kiln.
So this would have gone over the top of the whole kiln.
That's right. This is the domed roof.
Right.
That's obviously sort of collapsed in. They're absolutely bizarre.
We found two types of kiln furniture, and most importantly, examples of the pottery being made here in the 11th century, which is the same sort as what we found at the Millennium shops.
So that would have been one of these big, shallow food dishes, probably sat in the middle of the table with the family meal on it, and everyone sort of helped themselves, just like we did last night.
Yes.
Victor's drawing is more or less correct. It's just that this 11th century kiln was much smaller. The pot sat on bars radiating from the walls, and the firebox was underneath. Later in the early 12th century, when the kiln wasn't used for making pottery anymore, holes were dug to heat up glaze for pottery.
This is amazing, John. I mean, this is the first time I've seen this. Well, where did it come from?
Well, we think we've got one vessel here with two handles, a big jug, and then you can see bits of the base. And it was all together, and it was actually in one feature on top of the wall here. Now, you don't know about the wall either.
Well, no, go on, tell me.
I mean, we've got all this stonework forming this wall on this sort of alignment here. Now, it's clearly not a base of a bridge, but being out here, being below the 11th, 12th century pot, it's clearly early. So it's got to be something to do with a causeway, whatever, out in the estuary, outside of the site.
It's funny you should say that. But you get these bits with the green, they're not as sharp as the bits that are not green. Look at the stuff that hasn't got the green staining on. The edges are so much crisper, they're very, very sharp, whereas the stuff that's got the green staining on it is rounded and rolled. And I'm sure that this means that this stuff has been actually in the water. And I reckon they've just dug a trench into the sand, put a rough sort of basin in there, and like you say, I think it's a causeway, perhaps even a quay frontage.
What's interesting is that the geophys structure seems to line up with the area where Pepe thought the gateway into the suburb should be. So is there any evidence of a gateway here? Phil reckons there is.
Here's the edge of the wall. This is what I think. The wall comes along there.
Yeah.
I think it follows along to there.
Yeah.
And I think it follows along here.
Oh,
I
right.
think the stones in here joined up there. I think that all these stones have been robbed away. I think they've been taken away. I think you can see where there's a stone there, with a mortar down there. There's another one there with a mortar there.
The evidence for the other side of the gateway has been destroyed by modern building work. But as Phil points out, the surface of the road still survives.
But I think here is the actual road surface itself. Look, you've got these enormous bits of tile. They're actually impressed and broken in place, actually on the road surface.
More work's needed here to establish the date for this gateway. Stuart believes that it could have been a later addition and that the original gateway may have been in this area, in line with the road found alongside the Millennium shops.
In Phil Harding's trench, they picked up a road alignment, and in the corner of the cemetery there was another alignment, and you can see if you line the two up, it takes the roadway west of this Gart chamber and not to the east.
Stuart's also been looking at the wider picture.
You can see here, this is modern Denyer from an air photograph. There's the castle, the kiln site we've been digging, and the cemetery area. If we take a look at it as it was in the 11th century, it's a slightly different picture. Castle, walled town around it. This is a walled suburb area here. The town is built on this long sand dune that comes down here. The area behind it was trapped water. It's very muddy, very swampy.
Why couldn't they have built more suburbs on this green bit?
Well, it's a port, isn't it? It's a thriving trading centre in the Mediterranean. You want your activity, your focus of your settlement to be next to the waterfront.
Gathering together all the archaeological information, Victor's created an impression of Islamic Denyer in the 11th century. With the Medina, the old town with its mosques, bathhouses and markets, in the shadow of the Al-Kathaba, the castle. And the industrial zone on the outskirts with its kilns and workshops. But it's the suburb, the new town, that we can now add to the picture. We know the suburb was enclosed by high walls, designed, no doubt, to reflect the growing wealth of the port, as well as protect the rich merchants inside. We can also confirm that there were indeed structures out in the estuary, and perhaps one of them was a causeway providing a link with the rest of the town. In the 11th century, we think that one of the gateways into this new part of town was here, and that this might have been the view that greeted any visitor as he passed through the gate. 100 years later, we also know this view had changed dramatically. The shops had been demolished, and the cemetery for the Muslim merchants and traders of Denia had expanded to occupy this entire corner of the Islamic town.
Many, many thanks, and I hope you come back soon.
He didn't say next year, did he?